Hi, everybody. Welcome. And thank you so much for joining us tonight. And we are excited to have you here so that we can talk about wireless risks and safer technology solutions. Everything that we're speaking of tonight is being recorded, and we will send out the slides tomorrow as well as the recording. And we do have a chat feature on this Zoom. We invite you to drop questions into the chat, and at the end of my presentation, we will go ahead and field some questions. We do ask that we keep the chat relatively quiet so that those who are here to learn what we're presenting are not too distracted by what's going on in the chat. But by all means, drop in questions. And if you want to connect with somebody, go ahead and grab their contact information in the chat. Okay, so my name is Cece Doucette, and I am the Director of Massachusetts for Safe Technology, as well as the Education Services Director of Safer Screen Time, where we have a 1 hour course that can help us to train everybody in our workplace, our families, our schools, our communities on what this issue is and what the medical recommendations are. So we're pretty excited to be here tonight to share this information with you. And I'm delighted to have with me our co-host, who is Ellen Landauer. Ellen, if you want to go ahead and unmute yourself, I will give you a quick introduction. Ellen has worked in the health care practice for many years. She's also been a very staunch advocate here in Massachusetts out of Charlemont on the wireless issue and the smart meters that are being rolled out across the Commonwealth. And she's had success lately getting letters published to the editor in their local paper, the Greenfield Recorder. So, Ellen, tell us a little bit about yourself and how you came to learn about wireless risks.
Yeah, sure. As I like to say, it's in my DNA to understand the.
Oh, you got muted again. Sorry about that. I did that.
Okay, uh, because I grew up without it, and my grandparents on my mother's side came from Europe. They lived in Manhattan initially, and their favorite perfect vacation was to drive off into the countryside and stay at a working farm. Um, my parents married right after World War II, and their idea of a perfect honeymoon was to tie a big canoe on top of their car and head off to Lake George and paddle out to the Turtle Island in the middle of the lake and stay there. And they were there. They had their own private island. Um, so I was born into a world without cell towers, without Wi-Fi, um, without devices, and compared to what it is today, it's like Shangri-La. Um, many outdoor activities. We were constantly outdoors growing up in nature. Numerous camping trips, and at the campsites there were no electrical hookups. Nowadays, people maybe they wouldn't even use a campsite if they didn't have Wi-Fi. Um, so my background, my uh, main line of work is for 30 years. My husband and I had a practice of a body therapy, a hands-on, deep connective body tissue therapy, which is structural integration of the human body, which basically it was generically, popularly, it was known as Ralphing. It was named after Dr. Ida Ralph, who created the technique. And basically, it helps to dissipate the tensional pattern that everybody has in their body. So it works very deeply, and it helps to release what some people call body armor, that sort of being trapped in your own body with your tensions. Um, so just about, say, 15 years ago, um, I had a pivotal experience which really showed how much we are inundated with Wi-Fi and just electrical currents. And there was a very severe blizzard here. I was sitting right in the same place I am, and I was trying to write an article, and the my thoughts were not. I had a kind of a writer's block episode happening, and the electricity went out, and I set up a little battery operated light, and I went back to the computer, and all of a sudden my thoughts were totally clear. I was able to write. And that night, sleeping all without electricity all night, my husband and I woke up in the middle of the night and said, wow, this is like camping out. And that was, it was so amazing that the buzz that we are like constantly surrounded by, and all of a sudden it stops, and you almost feel like they took something away. But then when you get used to it, it's really wonderful. So since that time, the electricity to the bedroom has been turned off on the panel box almost all the time. And another pivotal thing that taught me about cell phones was I was on a trip with my mom, and we were late to something. We had to call ahead, and she handed me her cell phone. And as soon as I put it to my ear and it turned on, I felt like the kind of the inside, almost like deep inside my head by my ear, was burning. And I've had other experiences very similar, sleeping at a friend's house, and they were like really like over the top with Wi-Fi, and all night I could hardly sleep. My body felt like it was burning on the inside, sort of, I guess it was like being in a microwave oven. So that and many experiences that really confirmed this kind of conviction that I have efforted to take measures to get the Wi-Fi out of the house. We went Ethernet probably 12 or so years ago, and it really made a difference. We could feel it as soon as we did it, as soon as the Wi-Fi was off. And I recently, in light of this rollout of these smart meters, I had my smart meter moved off the house to the street to just get it off the house. I said to a friend recently, I'm not that interested in the news. Just tell me when the enemy is coming up the road. Well, National Grid is coming up the road armed with smart meters. And that's why I got very active advocating for everybody's rights, and even for the rights of the birds and the bees and the plants. So it's basically my inborn experience and that longing for that Shangri-La that motivates me to want to help with this advocacy.
Well, I am so grateful, Ellen, and it's been my pleasure to get to know you in recent months. And thank you for coming to co-host with me. It makes doing these programs much easier if we have a wizard behind the curtain back there helping with the controls. But I hear what you say. We have a colleague down in Rhode Island who is a scientist or engineer with our government, and she and both her children were so sick. And for years, the kids were vomiting every night and could not figure out what was going on. But when they moved from one home and unplugged everything and took all their equipment with them and went to the new house, before everything was set up, they're like, wow, we feel good in here. And then as soon as they hooked up their router and turned on their stuff, then they realized that was what was making them ill. So I'm so appreciative that you had that experience, that you had a clean environment and you knew what it felt like. And then when you introduced all these man-made frequencies, you could tell that was the difference. So
Yeah,
thank you.
yeah,
Thank you so much for sharing your experience, for everything you're doing out there in Charlemont. It's not falling on deaf ears. And I'm so grateful to the editors over at the Greenfield Recorder for publishing your articles. And doctors and others have also been publishing articles out there.
yes, yeah,
So thank you to everybody who's helping to raise the awareness so industry can't just come in and deploy this toxic technology. And we'll talk more about that tonight. So I'm going to go ahead and take the spotlight and I will start with a slide deck.
Shall I
Um,
mute myself now?
yeah, go
So I,
ahead and mute, Ellen. Thanks. And then if you can keep an eye on the chat, if there's anything you can answer in there, that's great. Otherwise, we will answer questions at the end of the presentation. So we're scheduled to go from 6 to 8 p.m. Eastern here. And as I said earlier, for those who joined a few moments ago, we will send out the recording and my slides tomorrow. So I'm going to go ahead and do my screen share. Okay. Ellen, can you give me a nod if you can see that? Okay, great. Okay, so these are the slides we'll send out tomorrow. And that MTPW after my name just means I had the privilege of earning a master's in technical and professional writing from Northeastern University. And never in a million years did I imagine that I would be using that degree plus my undergrad in communications to be doing this kind of work. But I'm grateful to have that skill set and to be able to present information, hopefully in a way that's not too technical, but that you can understand. And then with the links in my slides, you can go in and do your own research on the areas that interest you most. So I fell down the rabbit hole with this issue more than a decade ago. I had been running our local education foundation in our little town of Ashland, Massachusetts. And that was the time when the industry was rolling out their 21st century classroom. And we're in a small town. Our budgets were cut to the bone year after year. So we didn't have budget for what industry was telling us our children would need to succeed in the world. So, good to be parents. We jumped in and I did fundraising to get wireless infrastructure in our schools, to get iPads and Chromebooks and smartboards and minis and what we thought was going to give our kids a leg up in today's world. And then one night at book group, a girlfriend of mine who's an electrical engineer was reading a book called Zapped by Anne Louise Gittleman. And she was learning that wireless is not safe. So she mentioned it at book group and, it was book group. And I just made a mental note of it. And then not long after that, something crossed my desk from the American Academy of Environmental Medicine. Now, these are the doctors who get the conundrum cases that regular doctors haven't been trained on because something in the environment is making people ill. So the American Academy of Environmental Medicine back in 2012 put out a position statement to school superintendents saying, please do not let wireless into your schools. And I read that and I'm like, wow, what is this? So that's where I started doing the deep dive. And being a technical writer, I was thinking, is there any science to this? And I was astounded to find literally thousands of peer-reviewed studies all over the world showing extensive harm. And we're going to walk you through the science today. So I brought this up with our school committee and our school administrators, and we became the first in the United States back in 2014 to adopt these best practices for mobile devices. These are simple baby steps that any of us can do. Turn off the devices when not in use. Turn Wi-Fi on, so like your routers and stuff, only when needed, and always place the mobile device on a solid surface. And as we'll see in a moment, the manufacturers even warn us to keep these things away from our bodies. So I didn't know we were the first in the nation to do this, but others have been inspired by it. So we hope that you'll take the resources that we're presenting tonight and run with them. Share them with whomever you think might want to know about this issue. And then when I realized that this was just a sign hanging in our classrooms and that our district had not actually implemented all of this, they were waiting for higher authorities to tell them what to do. So I went to higher authorities. I met with our Senate President, Karen Spilka, who is our senator here in my town of Ashland. And she and I worked together with one of the attorneys in her office, Aaron Carty, and we introduced legislation that would form a commission and bring the right minds to the table at the state level. That was more than a decade ago. We had the same conversations with a legislator up in New Hampshire. He and his constituent came down to my home here in Massachusetts, and we sat at my kitchen table and we bonded over a nice bowl of soup. And we taught State Representative Patrick Abrami in New Hampshire what this issue is. And then he beefed up his bill, and we actually got that bill passed into law in just 7 months' time. And then New Hampshire formed a commission and spent an entire year investigating this issue and came out with a groundbreaking report that is one of the best documents we have in the country today. And we will share that with you today, too. And right around this time, somebody over in Europe had begun to figure out what this issue is and recognize that we can't fix it because people don't even know it exists. So we have to educate first. And they reached out to Dr. Deborah Davis, who is a Nobel Peace Prize co-laureate on climate change, and she had figured out the wireless issue and established an organization called the Environmental Health Trust, which is arguably the largest think tank and research database in the world today, or especially at least in the United States, with the Environmental Health Trust. So these folks in Europe reached out to Dr. Davis and asked if they could reference her database when they developed a course to teach the public what this is all about. And she said, absolutely. And you might want to get in touch with this woman, Cece Doucette, because she's making inroads in Massachusetts. So I connected with this group, and today I am partner with Dr. Mikko Ahonen, who's one of the world's leading scientists out of Finland. And he and I have built this little organization called Safer Screen Time. And we have a course that can literally be completed in about an hour online. So we have off-the-shelf training ready to go for anybody in the world who speaks English. And in the future, if we're able to fund it, we would love to put it into different languages. But we have so many incredible resources available today that we did not have back when I fell down the rabbit hole now 14 years ago. And then I was contacted by an amazing woman here in Massachusetts by the name of Patricia Burke. And she called me one day and said something about the bills. And I thought, oh, this must be the legislator's office. So, I said, hang on, let me run downstairs and get at my computer. And she was calling to tell me that this amazing Dr. Deborah Davis and other world-leading scientists were coming to the Massachusetts State House to ask for right-to-know legislation on the wireless issue. So for 2 years, I had been doing my own research and investigation, and it was just such a gift to be able to go to our State House and listen to these world-leading experts, not only this Nobel Peace Prize co-laureate, but she brought with her this Dr. Sharma from India, who has done some of the sperm studies to show that this radiation is damaging sperm. And he had managed to take their public radiation limits, which were way up here, where ours still are today. And Dr. Sharma was able to bring them down 90%. And they're still grappling with how to implement that in India. But it showed that with political will, we can absolutely make these important inroads. So Dr. Davis also had on her panel Frank Clegg, who's the retired president of Microsoft Canada. And when he retired, he was contacted by some of the scientists, and he did his research with a dozen of the world's leading experts on this topic. And he came back and he said, Canada's safety code 6 for wireless radiation is not safe. The Federal Communications Commission's guidelines for radio frequency exposure here in the US is not safe. And Frank Clegg founded Canadians for Safe Technology. So I'm sitting up there at the State House like a kid in a candy store because for 2 years I had nobody I could talk to. And here there's a world leading scientist, two of them, one from India, one from the US, a captain of industry. We also had Dr. Catherine Steiner Adair, who is a child psychologist, and she lectures all over the world. And she said wherever she goes now, she hears the same thing from kindergarten teachers, first grade, second grade, that these children are expecting their teachers to be edutainers now. And when something goes wrong, they lose their little minds and they don't know how to collect themselves anymore. So she wrote an amazing book called The Big Disconnect, and she takes it through every stage of childhood development and what technology is doing to our kids. And folks, it is not pretty. So I was just so gratified to be in a standing room only forum at our State House in Massachusetts and to be connecting with these world leading experts. So from there, with others that I met in Massachusetts, we formed Massachusetts for Safe Technology. So you can go out there and look at the science. We have resources for you. We have action items for you. And it's not dark and scary. You know, once we know about this issue, we're halfway there. All we need to do now is figure out how to protect ourselves. And then once we do that, how to protect our community. And there are wonderful inroads that we're going to share with you today. And then somebody down at the National Institutes of Health in 2018 found my work and asked if I would go down to the National Institutes of Health and co-chair the technology panel for the Health in Buildings Roundtable Conference. And I was so honored. And so I reached out to Frank Clegg from Microsoft Canada. I reached out to Dr. Deborah Davis, and she sent her then executive director, Theodora Scarrato. I reached out to Peter Sullivan, whose work I found online. Peter is a philanthropist, and earlier in his career, he was a fighter pilot for our military. So, kind of like Top Gun. And he's up there in a plane, way up with the natural high electromagnetic fields, inside of a plane with radar all over the outside in the cockpit with all this instrumentation using wireless technology to keep in touch with the earth. So Peter was up there and got a big walloping dose of man-made radiation. And when he left the military, he went to work in Silicon Valley. He was an engineer. And he was into technology, high tech, everything. And all of a sudden, he hit that tipping point and his health began to crash. He lost significant weight. His teeth got very brittle. And then when his two sons came up through the preschool years, they both were diagnosed on the autism spectrum. So Peter began to do his deep dive and he started investigating the science and he figured out that we need to reduce or eliminate these man-made frequencies. So he will tell folks today who have somebody on the autism spectrum in their circle, of course, you want to get away from the other pollutants. You want to go to a clean organic diet as best you can. He went so far as to do the heavy metal detox, and you need to do that very carefully as you pull these toxins out of the body and the brain. But he said, today, my first line of defense with parents is to do the digital detox. And today, neither of his sons are on the autism spectrum any longer. And I was like, wow, I never even knew that was an option. But Peter taught me that there's something called de novo mutations, which means this did not come from mom's bloodline. It didn't come from dad's bloodline. It came from somewhere in the environment. So you clean up the environment, and there's a good chance that you will experience some, if not all, recovery. And we don't want to overpromise. Everybody's body is very different. All of our genetics are different. All of our lived experiences and environmental exposures are different. But when we learn to get a hold of this invisible toxin that is wireless radiation, many times people see significant improvements in their health. So again, we don't want to overpromise, but we do want to teach what the science says, what the medical recommendations are, and baby steps that we can all start with today, and we'll cover all of that. So I like to include that Health and Buildings Roundtable link because we were all held to, I think, like 8 or 10 minutes on all of our talks. And so if you want to grab something highly credible, because it was down at the NIH, and something quick, that might be something you'd like to share. And then, with great thanks to Elizabeth Kelly, we offered the Electromagnetic Fields Medical Conference back in 2021 for 24.5 continuing medical education credits and nursing credits. And those were offered for 2 years. And once that accreditation period expired, Libby took the entire conference and put it online through Vimeo and YouTube at no cost. So anybody in the world can go and get professionally trained from world-leading scientists, doctors. We had attorneys speaking, we had building biologists, and I was honored to be brought in to help plan the conference and to speak on state and local policy. So you, as a citizen, are also welcome to attend this EMF medical conference. You could schedule 20 minutes of a lecture here, a half hour there, an hour there, and just pepper it into your calendar and learn with these world-leading experts. So just know we have incredible resources for you today. So that's my story. That's how I fell down the rabbit hole. And now I've also signed up to be an ambassador for Screen Strong. This is another group of parents whose children were detrimentally affected by excessive screen time, who have been working behind the scenes to try and get cell phones out of our schools and to bring education forward and to teach families how to pull back from being on screens all the time, because the science is now really clear that this is not how a child properly develops, and there's a lot of bad outcomes happening. So incredible resources, folks. Take a dive in when we send you our slides. So this is what we're going to cover in our presentation tonight. We're going to overview the technology impacts and what they're doing to childhood development. We're going to talk about digital dependency, and then we're going to talk about the sicknesses that are coming from the radiation from wireless devices. And then we'll talk about strategies to regain a healthier balance. And folks, as dark as this can be sometimes, there is always hope. So let's see what we can do. And we'll give you baby steps. Maybe we'll encourage you to take a tech Sabbath. But what does a child truly need for proper development? There's 4 cornerstones. The kids need to be moving. They should not be sitting sedentary behind a screen. They need tactile engagement with their environment, with their friends, with their family, with their loved ones, with the natural environment. They need that human connection, and they need to be out in nature. We are one of these little creatures running around on the planet. Every living thing is meant to be connected to the Earth's natural 24-hour light and dark cycle, to the electromagnetic fields that pulse up from the Earth. That's what keeps us developing on point. So where are we with these excessive technology exposures? If we spend our lives behind screens with television, cell phones, always on the internet, it creates a lifestyle that is sedentary, isolated. We feel neglected. We begin to neglect those around us. We get overstimulated by what we're seeing on the screens. This is causing developmental delays, mental illness. People are starting to feel detached from their world. We see significant increases in attention deficit hyperactivity disorder to autism, diabetes, stroke, heart attack, addiction, sex addiction, digital addiction, violence, perversions, medications needed, when actually, if we would just take charge of these environmental exposures, we might be able to get off of certain medications. It's creating impulsiveness, it's causing illiteracy, and this is not sustainable. It's causing early deaths. There's a dearth of meaningful relations. Some people can't hold down a job or they get so exposed from the radiation that they can't work in a work environment. And I want to give a shout out to our colleague, Chris Rowan up in Canada, who came up with these graphics with her organization called Zone In Programs. She's an occupational therapist. And she teaches us how to flip this, get the basics down, get these kids moving, get them the tactile interaction with their environment, connect meaningfully with real people and with nature. And then all the rest will follow. We will calm down the central nervous system. We will be able to form meaningful attachments. We'll be strong, coordinated, secure, regulated, calm, and focused. They say that so many children today, if they wanted to, couldn't even qualify for military service because they are overweight, they don't have core strength because they're sitting in a sedentary lifestyle. So we want optimal development. We want to create an environment where we can be attentive and where we can learn without distractions from all this technology. So let's see what we can do to create a sustainable future for our children. And this all applies to ourselves as well. So I think we're hearing a lot about digital dependency on the rise. This first caught my ear years ago when I heard that in Korea they have digital detox centers for 5-year-olds. And I'm thinking, wow, where are we going? So we know that this technology is developed, the apps are developed to overstimulate the pleasure centers of the brain so that we will stay hooked. It's leading to poor academic performance and it's impairing the way a brain should develop. It's impacting our communication skills, our ability to be empathetic with others. It's putting a damper on our creativity, our ability to solve problems. You hear people talk about the attention span of a gnat. Well, this is a key player in that. And our self-control. When we get digitally addicted and you try to separate a child from their device and they lose their little minds, you can bet that there's something going on there that we really need to pay attention to. And because they're just sitting there tapping and swiping, they're not developing their fine motor skills on point. And of course, when we're not moving and we're sitting there, perhaps eating food that is not in our best interest, we now have way too many children and adults grappling with obesity. And our colleague, Dr. Holly Groh, who is a corneal surgeon, she has taught us that we now have epidemic levels of myopia. And I said, well, Holly, what is myopia? And she said, because we're sitting there in the short distance of a screen, we are biologically changing the shape of our eyeballs. Our eyes, as humans on this planet, are meant to be scanning the horizon for predators. And we're not. We're spending too much time in the shallows of a screen, and it's literally changing the shape of our eyes, causing myopia. And now we have more and more children and adults having to get eyeglasses, and it's doing other sorts of retinal damages and all sorts of fun things. So lots of reasons why we need to take a serious hard look at how we engage with technology. So some of you may have heard that last year, Dr. Jonathan Haidt out of NYU, he's a PhD social psychologist. He published this amazing book called The Anxious Generation that's gotten a lot of really good press. And it's sort of giving people permission and reason to step back from all Wi-Fi all the time, all digital engagement all the time. He identifies 4 areas that this is really doing the damage: social and spiritual deprivation and degradation, sleep deprivation, because these apps are designed to keep us going, attention fragmentation, where we can't focus, and then the digital addiction or dependency. So what he says is that we, one, should never, ever, ever give a child a smartphone, and especially not before high school. They just don't have the maturity and development in their brains to handle it. And they need a lot of training in how to handle it safely, even at the high school age. So no social media, at all before 16 years old. And we need to have every school and every parent working toward phone-free schools so that the kids can pay attention and not be distracted. The science, and he quotes a lot of science in this book, but it shows even if the cell phone is not in active mode, if it's sitting there, those kids are distracted and they cannot be 100% focused on what the teacher is instructing them with. And this is going to make a lot of people uncomfortable. Those kids need to have unsupervised play and they need to figure things out in their childhood. They don't need parents hovering over them all the time. They don't need helicopter parents, tiger moms, snowplow parents that just clear the path for their kids. Those kids need to develop resiliency and they need to be able to work it out for themselves in many levels. And they need to be given some freedom to roam around. Because when I grew up, we didn't have media coverage like we have media coverage today that is constantly bombarding us with negative messaging that makes us think our whole world is so unsafe. Well, I'll tell you what, the statistics for childhood abductions and so forth were so much higher when I was a kid than they are today. But the media makes it seem like our world is so terribly unsafe. So we need to give kids some freedom and some independence to develop all those areas of social engagement on their own to a degree. We're not saying just throw them to the wolves, but we need to start letting our kids develop. And then Dr. Victoria Dunkley, if you suspect that your kid has gone down a dark alleyway with technology, she has created this book called Reset Your Child's Brain. And it's a 4-week plan to end meltdowns, to get their grades back up, and to boost their social skills by reversing the effects of electronic screen time. And so she's got this 4-week plan where the first week the parents learn, they come up to speed, they set a plan, they tell everybody around their kid what they're going to be doing, and not to let their kid go over to your house and let them get their fix on the computers or the tablets or the cell phones or any of the gaming systems. Get the support system set up in week 1, come up with a plan of what you're going to do. And she has, the plans laid out in there. And then for 3 weeks, you digitally detox your child. And as unnerving as that sounds, by the end of that 4 weeks, the whole family is so gratified because they're all paying attention to their habits and setting new habits and supporting one another. So just know for everything we've broken, we have amazing experts right here to help us get back on track again. So some people ask, what about the American Academy of Pediatrics? Where do they stand on all of this? So they have long said no screen time before 2 years of age. For older children, only 1 or 2 hours per day, and that includes what they're doing in schools. Don't let the schools tell you that it's okay for them to be on screens all day long and then go home and have 1 to 2 hours per day. That is not how a child develops properly. And they have a family media use plan, which can be a nice starting point for you and your children to sit down and come up with a plan together. What is appropriate? What's age appropriate? And how do we begin from here? So those are some thoughts on childhood development and how to get back on track. Now let's switch gears and talk about the actual radio frequency microwave radiation that is transmitted by all of our wireless technology. So we're going to look at the legal fine print. I'm going to give you a demonstration of what this invisible exposure looks like. We're going to just get a little bit into what exactly are these radio frequencies? What does the science tell us for long-term and short-term effects on our health? And then where is all this stuff coming from to kind of get us thinking about it? And why don't we know? All right. And then, of course, we want to end with solutions. What can we do? What baby steps can we take to start protecting ourselves and our loved ones? So, anybody who's with us right now who has an iPhone, I invite you to take it out right now and go into settings. I want to show you where the legal fine print is. And for anybody who has an Android or a Google phone or another platform, it's in there. You just have to look up RF exposure in your device. I just happen to know right where it is on the iPhone. So Our friends at the Environmental Health Trust have a page called See the Fine Print, and you can go in and read the actual disclaimers that have been buried in all of our devices. The iPad, for example, had a disclaimer in it talking about these devices can cause seizures, blackouts, and eye strains. And I know of children who had their first seizures while using a tablet with all the radiating antennas turned on. Okay, so in an iPhone, from your settings, scroll down a little bit and hit General. From General, go all the way down to the bottom where you'll see Legal and Regulatory. So Settings, General, Legal, and Regulatory. Hit that. And on the next screen, about 4 down from the top, you'll see RF Exposure. There's a lot of acronyms in this work. EMF stands for electromagnetic fields. These are the pulsations of radio frequency radiation that go out for miles from our devices, from the cell towers, from the routers, from the utility smart meters. The cell towers go for miles. Our own devices go far enough to be able to connect with those signals. So in this legal fine print under RF exposure, they call it energy because it is a man-made energy form, which is actually radio frequency microwave radiation. And the first big paragraph in your disclaimer there, at the bottom, it says, we tested this at a distance from the body. So if you are using this device with the antennas turned on, which is how they give it to us, you are exceeding the Federal Communications Commission's guidelines for public radiation exposure. What they don't tell you is that they have mounted multiple antennas, a separate antenna for each service that they have given us: cellular and data, Wi-Fi, Bluetooth, hotspot, locator, 5G, and any other little fancy, antennas that they put in there for our convenience without telling us the trade-off on our health. So each one of those separate antennas is constantly pulsing this microwave radiation going, here I am, where are you? Here I am, where are you? Here, to make that handshake. And our message today is not no technology, because we love it, we live by it, we do a lot with it, but we need to come back and swing toward the middle and find a balance so that we can stay protected and connected. But hey, if you read down another paragraph or two in that legal fine print, they're good guys, right? They'll say to reduce your exposure, basically, once you know you're radiating yourself, don't touch it. To reduce your exposure, use a hands-free option. Like, I'm going to stop sharing to show you a couple of things. Use a hands-free option like the headset that some people use, but you want to be really careful because one of the properties of microwave radiation is it amplifies with metal. So, well, first of all, if you have earbuds in your ear, that's a really bad idea because you've now put a microwave transmitter on both sides of your brain that's now sending signal across your brain, plus back and forth to wherever your device is. If you've got it tucked in your bra or your shirt pocket or your suit pocket or your waistband or your back pocket, you are really radiating yourself in a very detrimental way. So those earbuds are a really bad idea. And then if you use a regular wired headset, this microwave radiation amplifies with metal. So if you're plugging it into a radiating device, and then that radiating device is sending the radiation up the wire and right into your brain, well, that's not such a great solution either. But again, there are better solutions out there. This is something called a hollow tube or an air tube headset. And you will notice that it has just rubber tubing, right? That goes up to your brain. No metal, no magnets to hang it around your neck or anything, because metal amplifies radiation and you don't want to be putting that up to your brain. But these hollow tube or air tube headsets have a ferrite bead on each side that breaks the radiation that has traveled up the wire. So it operates much like a stethoscope for a doctor. You get great acoustics, and it's got the little audio controls, down here where you can mute it or, audio control, whatever. And then it's got a nice long cord so you can set your device as far away from you as you can. So our Centers for Disease Control and Prevention, the CDC, they recommend that we take the approach with man-made radiation three-pronged. One, spend as little time as you can radiating yourself. Two, create as much distance as you can from something that's radiating. And three, if you can't get away from it, shield yourself from it. That's why for ionizing radiation, when we go to the dentist or the doctor and we get an x-ray, we wear a lead apron to protect our sensitive organs from that. So if you can't get away from it, you might want to contact a building biologist who can help you with the shielding. It needs to be done very carefully because you don't want to, create a shield that would then reflect on something and bounce back and give you a double whammy. And at the end of my slides, I will give you some suggested links for where you can go for the Building Biology Institute, some trusted folks that we know who sell some of these equipment components. But the bottom line is there is no safe level of man-made radiation in the scientific literature. So our goal is to get as low as reasonably achievable. Okay. So that's what you can do differently if you need to use an earpiece of some sort. Try and get a hollow tube or an air tube. And when I first fell down the rabbit hole with this, I'm like, this is invisible. How do we even know what we're being exposed to? And then my engineer girlfriend, we did a really crude thing with just a transistor radio that would pick up the frequencies and start screeching when we were up against a high exposure. And then at the EMF medical conference, this is the device that was recommended for doctors to take into their practice and loan to their patients so that they can go home and do the scavenger hunt, write down where the exposures are coming from and at what levels, and then the doctor would teach them how to mitigate. So this is a device called the Safe and Sound Pro 2. It's a third-party certified calibrated radio frequency detection meter. It's about $400. There's a little baby sister one, less than $200. So the company is called Safe Living Technologies. And again, I'll have a link at the end of my slides. But I want to give you a demonstration because this I had a really hard time getting my head around until I could measure. So I've done the best that I can here in my home to simply choose safe technology, which is hardwired. So see how I'm in the green and occasionally it pops up into the yellow. I'm getting a maximum reading of 11 microwatts per square meter. So basically in 3 feet of air, how much radiation is there? The goal is to get no more than 100, and in our sleeping areas, try and get it down to 10 or less. That's what the science is suggesting would help our bodies be able to repair and regenerate at night. So, I'm mostly in the green in my house all the time. So I'm going to take my cell phone out of airplane mode. And, my cell phone is pretty much a glorified clock and camera. I rarely use it. I use a landline. You can forward cell phone calls to a landline. And I know many got talked out of their landlines, but you can get it back for like 20 bucks a month. So if you can afford that, then you don't have to have any wireless technology in your home. So I'm going to take this out of airplane mode and watch what happens. So we are now in the flashing red, which is as high as this goes, and it's sending out an extreme alarm that this is not a safe radio frequency radiation level. So I'm going to take it back. No, it's still going. I'm going to take it back into airplane mode. And we were at what, about 15 microwatts per square meter. And we look at the maximum spike on here, and I know you might not be able to see it up close. But anyway, I'll read it to you because it holds on to that maximum peak, and it's that peak spike of radiation that is so disruptive to our biological cells. We went from 15 microwatts to 3,180,000. 3 million. And here in my home where I sleep, we want to be at 10 or less. So what are we doing to ourselves and to our children if one device puts us up over 3 millions and 3,180,000 is the top of this meter? I suspect it's even higher than that, but that's the maximum that this meter captures. So it's important to measure. And I'm going to go back to my slide presentation and give you some encouragements of what we can do in our communities. And again, folks, we are the pioneers with all of this. We didn't have this growing up, so we get to figure it out and reinvent the wheel and sort it and fix it and do what we can do. So that was a Safe and Sound Pro 2 meter. And when I realized that there's a way to measure this, we can do our gap analysis. I went after a grant in my town, and it was not easy because they had no idea what I was talking about. It took me 3 grant cycles and 3 application cycles, but I wanted a meter for our library and I wanted one for our schools. And, everyone was a little nervous about this because it was so against mainstream messaging. But once I presented the science, they gave me a $400 grant to put one of these meters on loan in the Ashland Public Library. Conditionally, I had to go speak to the trustees at the library and get their permission to put it on loan. And so that was back in 2016. And after I presented the information, one of the gentlemen on the board sat there with his arms crossed, and you could just tell that he had like hogwash written all over his forehead. He didn't really believe what I was saying. Another one said, well, I want to get that meter and take it home and see what's going on in my house. And then a third one said, regardless of how we feel personally, as a conduit of information in the community, our library may want to consider bringing this into circulation. So let's take a vote. And they voted 4-1, and we became the first in the United States to put a radio frequency detection meter on loan in our library 8 years ago. So that has inspired people all over to do the same thing. And now with technology and people having entertainment on their devices, people don't come to the library as often as they did to borrow books or movies. So libraries are having to reinvent themselves. So today, it's actually a pretty easy ask for citizens to go to their librarian and say, hey, we have a Library of Things collection, which is amazing. We may have an air quality meter. We may have a projector people can borrow. We may have puzzles and games. How about we get a radio frequency detection meter for the community to borrow as well? And if the library doesn't have budget to afford a good meter in the $400 range, our friends at the Environmental Health Trust have a small grant fund. And if the librarian contacts them, they can help them get a very significant discount on this meter. So just know, folks, we are all about solutions. And this is something your library may have funding, no problem. But it's so great when people reach out and said, hey, I love that idea. I talked to our library and we got one put into circulation. That just makes my day. So use these resources, folks, and let us know how you make out. So let's get into the nitty gritty. What is wireless radiation and why should we even care about it? What happened when we went from communicating through wires to all of this wireless technology? Well, let's start with Mother Earth. Electromagnetic fields are produced naturally by the earth, and we get this loving, healthy pulsation of the Earth's energy 7.83 times a second, or 7.83 hertz. There's a scientist named Schumann who figured this out. So this is called Schumann's resonance. Every living thing on the planet is meant to be connected to this beautiful healing energy. And that's what is natural to us, to the birds, the bees, the trees, and every bacterial cell on the planet. When we got so fancy with digital technology, we started pulsating electromagnetic fields man-made in the million range. So a megahertz is 1 million times per second. We are getting hit with man-made microwaves. And now with 5G and the Internet of Things, they're really pushing us into the gigahertz range. Gigahertz means 1 billion times per second. We are getting jackhammered with microwaves 1 billion times per second. So Dr. Martin Blank was a scientist with Columbia University, and he and his son, R. Blank, wrote a book called Overpowered. And that's, in a word, what we've done to ourselves. We have allowed ourselves to become overpowered with man-made radio frequencies. And folks, our bodies are simply not meant to operate with those frequencies competing with the natural rhythms of our bodies. So there's something called the electromagnetic spectrum that teaches us about wavelengths and pulsations, and these longer wavelengths used to come from radio towers, television stations, and if you weren't directly right underneath those, the signals that came our way were pretty nebulous. They didn't usually make people sick unless you happen to be like right under the broadcast tower. And then we got into the microwave segment of this spectrum. Cell towers, cell phones, utility smart meters, microwave ovens, baby monitors, gaming devices, radar, Wi-Fi, satellites, all of that beaming at us all the time. And then beyond that, we have the ionizing area where we know that those pulsations are strong enough to break the atom. And for a long time, the industry would say, oh, this non-ionizing radiation or low level, non-thermal, meaning it doesn't create heat, can't harm us because it doesn't break the atom. Well, it's not about the heat. It's about all these other biological effects that are having, and we're going to go through that with you next in the science. So in the long term, what does the science tell us? Child and adult cancers. This past year, there was a study partially funded by the World Health Organization that determined high certainty that this man-made radio frequency microwave radiation causes cancer. And that finding was based on some really large studies that were done. Back in 2011, the World Health Organization classified this man-made radiation as a group 2B possible human carcinogen. What was missing at the time were the rodent studies or the animal studies. And so the industry partnered with our government, and they spent $30 million to go in and find out, could the technology of the day, which 2 decades ago was cell phones, early cell phones, 2G going into 3G, could they cause harm? They went in thinking it should be fine. Well, what they found was clear evidence of cancerous tumors and DNA damage. And DNA is the roadmap to grow a proper anything from a child to a pollinator to a plant, any of it. This damages DNA, and the industry will get a hold of these good studies and go, oh, that's just one study. You need to have more than one in order to prove anything. Well, right on the heels of our National Toxicology Program study, and by the way, the NTP is part of the National Institutes of Health in the environmental health sciences. They have long been the gold standard for toxics research, and they spent more money on this study than anything to date that they had funded. So $30 million, clear evidence of cancer. And then the Ramazzini Institute in Italy conducted another multi-million-dollar study and determined from cell towers, same thing, cancerous tumors, DNA damage, and more. So folks, we don't need more science. We need to get public policy to protect us and to protect ourselves in the interim. So we have the science on the DNA damage. When I first learned about these infertility studies, I started reading them, and I found out that when you expose male human sperm to this man-made radiation, say from a cell phone or a laptop, it changes the DNA, it slows the motility of the sperm, and it causes apoptosis or programmed cell death. It's killing off the sperm in just 4 hours of exposure. And I went, you've got to be kidding me. I had just sent our oldest daughter up to college with her MacBook. Our youngest had just gone into high school at the time, and we thought we'd give her a leg up because we kept hearing about this 21st century classroom. So for Christmas, we gave her a laptop to go into high school with. and where both my girls using their technology, but right on top of their reproductive organs. And Kaiser Permanente has done a really good study that's never been questioned that showed higher miscarriage rates for women who are using these man-made devices with radio frequency. So we have strong repeated studies showing infertility is a huge problem. And then neurotoxicity. Dr. Hugh Taylor heads up OBGYN at Yale Medical, and he has done the rodent studies where they expose these rodents to cell phone radiation for, like 10 minutes on, 10 minutes off for 9 hours a day. And what they discovered is when you expose the pregnant mice to this man-made radio frequency, the pups come out and start bouncing off the walls of the cage, exhibiting behaviors much like a child with attention deficit or attention deficit hyperactivity disorder. And then there's Dr. Martha Herbert, who founded the Autism Lab at Massachusetts General Hospital. She was a pediatric neurologist out of Harvard. She's now retired, but still doing a lot of important work in this area. And she found huge connections between what she was seeing in the families in her care and what we know happens to the brain and the central nervous system with man-made radiation exposure. Dr. Martin Pall, P-A-L-L, Paul, he called the science on Alzheimer's disease, and other scientists like Pal Patcher for years had been studying this. And it used to be that Alzheimer's would hit in our 90s or our 80s, and then it started happening in our 70s and 60s, 50s, 40s, 30s, and even in rare cases to people in their 20s. So we cannot continue to pollute the environment of the brain and expect that we're going to have the same outcomes that we once had. And then we're so very grateful when groups that are working on additional environmental exposure issues, like the Environmental Working Group, get funding to start addressing this issue as well. They have come out with a series of fact sheets, and here's just a couple of them. This one is about protecting kids from wireless radiation in schools and at home. This one is the effects of radio frequency radiation on the nervous system. So know your audience if you are wanting to open this conversation with others. And I knew about the Environmental Working Group as a mom because I used to get their Clean 15 and Dirty Dozen fact sheets every year. They make a list of what produce, fruits and vegetables, you could do all right with buying conventionally grown and which ones are so heavily toxic that you really ought to get them organically grown if you can. So I already had a trusted relationship with them, and I was just so excited to see that they had a PhD on staff who was working on the wireless issue. So know your audience. Go grab these fact sheets if you think that might be something somebody you know would like to see. And folks, children are not just little adults. They are still under development. Their skulls are thinner. Their brains have a higher water content, and inch per inch, they are absorbing more radiation than you and I. So with great thanks to Dr. Om Gandhi and his colleagues who did the modeling for this, these are head models turned sideways, and the little yellow dot is the ear. When you and I put an active cell phone up to our head, it is microwaving our brain about a third of the way through. When we do that to a 10-year-old child, we're microwaving their brain about 3/4 of the way through. And on a 5-year-old child, we are microwaving almost their entire brain. So it's a whole new age in parenting in the digital age, and we really need to step up today, start putting our foot down, do the education, and then start taking the baby steps that will teach you. So we know it causes cancer. We know it causes infertility. We know it causes neurotoxicity. And as we go through these short-term effects, many of you may recognize them in yourselves or your loved ones or your colleagues. But the good news is once we learn, we can mitigate. So please know that the Americans with Disabilities Act has long since recognized these electromagnetic sensitivities that are today being classified as electromagnetic radiation syndrome or EMR syndrome. So there are accommodation recommendations already made through the ADA. So many people don't sleep well today. And for children and adolescents, sleeping is what we did best as a child, right? But when we leave these man-made frequencies pulsating at night, what the science shows us is that we are light beings, meaning that we operate off of this circadian rhythm of light and dark. And in the wee hours of darkness, we are meant to release melatonin from the brain that goes in and regulates our sleep. It also helps to clean up the everyday detox from our body. So, what happens when we leave these man made frequencies invisible, pulsating all night? The brain sees them. And the brain's over there going, hey, when's it going to get dark so I can release melatonin to regulate your sleep? So, if we leave this pulsating all night, a lot of people hit that tipping point where they don't sleep right anymore. Headaches, stabbing, searing headaches, migraines, nosebleeds, ear bleeds, fatigue, chronic fatigue increasing, pain from unidentified sources. So, with great thanks to Dr. Magda Havas up at Trent University in Canada, and now radiologist Dr. Rob Brown, we have the science to show what the heck is going on here. It's called rouleau formation. In my little brain, that sounds a lot like the candy Rolos, those caramel chocolates that are stacked up. Well, it's kind of like that. Our red blood cells are meant to be these nice, smooth ovals or circles individually circulating through our body to bring oxygen to all of our systems and organs. And they're structured such that these red blood cells repel each other. So one by one, they can go where they need to go to oxygenate. What we see under Dr. Havas's microscope is that they start magnetizing toward each other. They start getting deformed and looking like a bottle cap rather than these smooth ovals. And then they start glomming together. And now they're clumping. And those clumped red blood cells can no longer get through those tiny little vessels to bring oxygen to where it needs to go. So now we have all of this oxidative stress going on, reactive oxygen species, which is, a fancy terms that doctors understand. But this oxygen problem is a basis for most chronic illness today. So if we can rectify that, we may see a lot of these symptoms alleviate. And then skin abnormalities. So here's another thing we know, a mechanism of harm. We have little antennas in the surface of our skin, just like the birds and the bees have their own navigation systems built in that are synchronized with the earth. So we have our little antennas in the surface of the skin that tell us, hey, ooh, it's getting too hot. You better go in and cool off before you get heat stroke, or wow, it's too cold. You better get indoors before you get hyperthermia. When we put ourselves in this environment of man-made radio frequency, we have a lot of people talk about the hot ear. And our co-host tonight, Ellen, was saying that it felt like something was going on deep inside of her skull when she put that cell phone up to her head. So some people get the hot air. For me, it was when I was using a decked cordless phone and my mom lived on the other coast. So when we finally caught up, I would talk for a couple hours and I would have that decked cordless phone stuck in a pocket. I would have a wired earpiece up to my brain so that I could, multitask and do the dishes and cook dinner and fold laundry while we caught up with each other. And I would get off the phone and go, dang, my head feels so wonky. Well, little did I know, I just spent 2 hours radiating my brain through that little earpiece that I had, bringing the radiation right up to my brain. Some people will experience skin itching, burning, rashes, flushing. So our skin's giving us signals. We just need to learn how to listen. And then our cells whisper to each other all day and night through these electrical circuit impulses, right? And when we overpower those with man-made circuits and electrical pulses, it can dysregulate our hearts, our lungs, with the heart, palpitations, arrhythmias, AFib, chest pains where somebody might say, it feels like someone's sitting on my chest. I can't catch my breath. Blood pressure that goes too high or too low, depending on your individual proclivity. And then cognitive impairment. It used to be we'd open the fridge and go, what did I come in here for? But now we're seeing cognitive impairment in children, in adolescents, in young adults, all the way up through adulthood. And one of the most disturbing things I heard at the EMF medical conferences, a couple of the experts, the doctors and scientists were saying, if we don't get ahead of this, we are very likely going to see more of these societal outbursts like we've seen with these mass shootings because it is physiologically, this microwave radiation is changing the gray matter and the white matter of the brain, where we would make good, sound decisions with executive function, and we are damaging those parts of the brain. It's a huge risk. And it really hit home after the pandemic ended. Meanwhile, we had sent these children home with a wireless tablet to access their education with not one shred of safety or hygiene training. And so in many homes, we know they had unfettered access because mom and dad and guardians were working so hard to try and still work. The kids, they're having to be homeschooled. And we know those kids had a lot more access because they couldn't get out with their friends. So they spent a lot of time online getting exposed. And here in the Boston market, in 1 week, I saw 3 different newscasts where the kids were losing their minds in school and literally getting so angry that they were beating on their classmates with their tablets. And I mentioned that to a woman at my yoga class, and she says, wow, I'm a counselor in a neighboring town, and one of my colleagues is out on disability right now because one of those high school boys beat the tar out of her with his tablet. So, folks, it's not that this might happen. This is actually happening right now, and we need to acknowledge that this man-made radiation is very likely a leading cause in all of this. And then even before the pandemic, we were already at epidemic levels statistically of anxiety and depression, and we were already seeing suicidal ideation among children and adults like we had never seen before. So sometimes it's helpful to hear about this in people's own words. There are colleagues over in Europe who started World Electromagnetic Radiation Day or EHS Day, Electrohypersensitivity Day. And we get together every year and help people to tell their stories in 2 minutes or less. So if you want to click on that link, you can hear directly from people and you may relate to what they're going through. So please know the information is there, but we need to become aware of the choices that we've been led to make. The Internet of Things, they are forecasting that if we follow along with their indoctrination of us, we are all going to have 200 wirelessly connected devices in our homes for 5G and the Internet of Things. Not me. Thank you very much. But we need to know to look at everything. These smartphones and anything with Bluetooth, that's a separate antenna that's transmitting radiation. Wi-Fi, 3G, 4G, 5G, all of the routers, cordless phones and headsets, tablets, laptops, printers, mice, keyboards. I was fortunate to save what I had originally bought. And down in the basement in a box, I found my corded keyboard, my corded mice. I found all my Ethernet cables, and we're going to teach you what to do with all that again. The gaming devices, the virtual reality, please, please, please don't put a radiating device up to your brain or a child's brain. The baby monitors, you don't want to be putting a microwave transmitter. It's like having a cell tower right next to your little precious babe there. Smart hearing aids aren't so smart if you are putting a microwave transmitter up to your brain. Wearables, and again, the idea is not no technology. Let's learn about each device and get to as low as reasonably achievable. It turns out with those wearables, you should be able to turn off the antennas and everything that is put on your devices, on your cell phone, on your tablet, on your wearables just turn off the antennas. And many of the apps will still work to track whatever it is you're tracking. Or if you've downloaded entertainment, that's still there. You don't need to be sending signal back and forth once it's downloaded. So let's learn to take control over what you and I can control. And then let's learn what's going on with the community level exposures, like at work in school. These wireless access points are mounted on the ceiling. The good news is you flip them over, they've got two Ethernet ports on them. All you got to do is drop a wire down, an Ethernet cable to task level, and then hook it up, right? It's not rocket science to fix this. Then there's those macro cell antennas, the big cell antennas that were mounted on towers way out in industrial parks when we got started. And then the industry started encroaching and bringing them closer and closer to where we live, where we go to school, where we work, where we play. And those are very toxic. And now with 5G, they want to put a cell tower basically every 2 to 12 houses to carry that signal close to where our devices are. And 5G or fifth generation doesn't replace 4G and 3G, it adds on to it. So when we looked at that electromagnetic radiation spectrum, the reason why you can get signal indoors is because these are longer wavelengths that can penetrate a building and get in there. These 5G signals are using millimeter waves, teeny tiny waves that they spin up as saying, oh, you'll get vast quantities of data. You'll get super speedy downloads. We'll have smart cities, super highways. You know, they're putting all this sexy advertising around all this, but those little millimeter waves get disrupted very easily by anything in the path, like a tree or leaves or rain or snow. So you can't have them far away. So they're starting to put these small cells, and there's nothing small about the harm or the radiation, right at bedroom height, in the curb, in our public access way. It's unconscionable, and they are working hard and fast to get them in before they're made to stop. And now the industry is rolling out utility smart meters. So back when I was a little kid, we would play hide and seek. I'm the youngest of 10 children. And so I spent a lot of time hiding outside when I was a little kid. And to keep myself entertained, I would just sit there and watch the little dials go around on the meters that captured our usage for gas, water, electric. Those were great. Those were what's called an analog meter, which means it was just strictly a mechanical device that captured the usage. And then we got a bill because somebody came and walked the neighborhood, took our reading down, and we got our bill every month. Those are safe utility meters. Then the industry, because they want to have an ever increasing revenue stream, came through and convinced our towns that we should replace all those good old analog meters with digital meters. So the way they sold it is to say, hey, town, you will save money by not having to pay the walker to go through the neighborhood every, month to get the readings. We will set it up so that the data transfers wirelessly from everybody's home off to a collection station and then off to the utilities. That's what these utility smart meters are. And the first phase of them were drive-by readings where they would have somebody in a truck drive by and point their scanner at your meter. That would pick up the reading, and then they would go to the next house. So my understanding is that the guys in the truck would radio up to, the utility company and say, hey, we're going into this neighborhood. They would turn on the meters, and then they would catch the signal as they drove by. And then when they were done, they would radio in and say, hey, we're done with that neighborhood. You can shut it down. So it only pulsed that radiation for a very short time each month to get the reading. And then they started with the smart meters. So those were digital meters. Now we've got digital smart meters. And what they are doing is pulsating 24/7. I was preparing to testify before the Massachusetts Department of Public Utilities because we want a no-fee opt-out. And so I located the meters at my home. We have a solar system and a regular electrical supply, so we have 2 meters on our home. They're mounted outside my dining room, thankfully, not outside of a bedroom where we sleep. And I sat there with my radio frequency meter and I counted. And when I counted up on a 24-hour cycle and did the math, that was pulsating microwave radiation into my home 17,000 times a day. And if you have a sensitive population person like a pregnant woman, a child, an elderly person, or anybody with an existing health condition, that added body burden is going to be very likely to tip them over into electrical sensitivities. Or you could have a perfectly healthy person that just gets taken down by this microwave radiation. Sometimes what can happen is if things aren't properly installed or properly grounded, that radio frequency can actually hop on the metal pipes and metal wires of your house and travel all over the home, turning your home into one giant radiating antenna. So these utility smart meters are not smart. They got pushed down from the federal level back in the Duval-Patrick administration here in Massachusetts. And now National Grid and Eversource are rolling them out all over the Commonwealth of Massachusetts. I think because we fought so hard for a decade or more, and with great thanks to other advocates who'd been on this before I even knew we had a problem, we now have an initiative in Massachusetts to give the right to opt out of these meters, but they're attaching a tariff to it so that you have to pay to get a non-transmitting meter, and then you're going to have to pay 30 or 40 bucks a month every month forever to get your meter read. Well, during the pandemic, folks who had the opt-out were able to just send in their information. So there shouldn't have to be a high charge on this. Out in California, with great thanks to Sydney Cox, she let us know that they have a program there for a smart meter opt-out where you pay a fee to get the actual meter, and then you pay a $10 fee for 3 years every month, and then it goes away. So it kind of sunsets after that. And here they want to charge us like 3 or 4 times that. And that's just for the public utilities. There are towns throughout Massachusetts that have their own utilities set up, and they can charge whatever they want. There was a family out in one town in Massachusetts who had already taken their children out of the schools because they didn't want them radiated by that industrial strength Wi-Fi system. So they were very up on the science and very careful. And when they heard that they were, I think it was gas or water meters were coming in with smart technology, they wanted to opt out. And the town did not play nice in the sandbox. They were very rude to this family. They were threatening to this family. They said, "You want an opt out? It's going to cost you $100 a month." So we need regulation at the state level so that everybody has the right to opt out of this toxic technology as a first line of defense. But we need to get the industry to hardwire these to the home so you don't need any radio frequency. And Chattanooga, Tennessee has already hardwired to the premises. And then there's the satellites now that are taking all this radiation and beamforming it down to a collector down on the ground that then connects to your devices. So we are being inundated, and there's a lot of really good people working behind the scenes to raise the awareness on this. So one of my big head scratchers was, if this is as bad as I can figure out just by reading the peer-reviewed science, why don't we know about it? So I got involved in this in 2012. And then in 2015, Harvard's Law School Center for Ethics came out with this 59-page report that's available online at no cost called Captured Agency: How the Federal Communications Commission is Dominated by the Industries it presumably regulates. And notice what they put on their cover. It's a revolving door. And that's what's happened to many of our federal agencies today. The FDA, the FCC, the CDC, the EPA, all these agencies that were initially set up to protect the health and safety of the public have now been captured by the industries. that promote their agenda rather than public health and safety. So that was my aha moment. I'm like, oh, there is no cavalry coming. There's nobody protecting us today from man-made radio frequency radiation. So that's why I got busy on this, as so many are doing today and using their voices. And they called out to and captured agency that the media is captured as well. So when you turn on your radio, when you listen to your TV, start ticking off whose ads are you hearing? You're hearing big pharma, you're hearing big Wi-Fi, you're hearing big tech. You're hearing from all these companies who own the media messaging. So Verizon, Comcast, AT&T, T-Mobile, our mainstream networks can't afford to go up against them because that's where all their revenue comes from, or their parent companies may be outright owned by these industry conglomerations. So we here in Massachusetts at Massachusetts for Safe Technology, I've got a news page out at our website, and people might say, well, gee, I don't believe this. I don't ever hear about this. So we collect articles like my wonderful co-host Ellen tonight. She has gotten several letters to the editor posted lately in the Greenfield Recorder. So go out and look at the news page. Look at all these communities that really are starting to take charge of this and educate. And I can be brought in to educate. There are others out there who can as well. But we put this together to empower you to feel confident to start these conversations in your community. So one of the things that had me puzzled is we did this $30 million study with the National Toxicology Program that showed clear evidence of cancerous tumors and DNA damage. Now, clear evidence is the highest of 5 categories that can be assigned to a toxin. It was commissioned by the Food and Drug Administration. So once we had clear evidence, that should have triggered public policy. But what happened? The gentleman at the time who was in charge of the FDA's radiation control, he went over to his friends at the Federal Communications Commission and said, we don't really have, let's not do anything. Let's just keep doing what we've been doing since 1996 when we set these ridiculous radiation levels. So one might ask, what would possess Dr. Jeffrey Shuren of the FDA to do that? And then another colleague went and did the digging around and discovered that Dr. Shuren was married to a woman who's an attorney in a big law firm. She's a partner in the law firm that represents big everybody, big Wi-Fi, big pharma, big agri, big food. So he had a huge conflict of interest and should have been nowhere near that $30 million study that showed this is a carcinogen. So we've got dirty politics up and down the chain. Unfortunately, it goes all the way up to the World Health Organization, and we've learned that they have reopened their investigation. Back in 2011, they determined this was a Group 2B, possibly human carcinogen, and they were careful to note that it doesn't matter where these man-made frequencies are coming from, they're all potentially causing harm. So they reopened their investigation, but it turns out there's 2 groups at the World Health Organization. One of them would be the actual qualified scientists and doctors whose life's work is investigating man-made radio frequency. And then the other is a self-appointed group of industry folks. And it looks like the industry folks have once again gotten a hold of this, and they are doing a poor job with their investigation into this new opened thing that they're doing up there. And then look at this. We talked earlier about the American Academy of Pediatrics having a family media plan to start your family thinking about technology more safely, but they don't talk about the wireless radiation. Why is that? Well, look at this little red circle. Telecom is one of their sponsors. So the corruption runs deep. Even, oh, it broke my heart with Girl Scouts. Ericsson, which is a big telecom company, got in there and talked the Girl Scouts into doing a badge on 5G and the Internet of Things. Let's get these little girls indoctrinated at an early age. And didn't they redesign the sash for the girls with a cell phone pocket in it, with no safety testing to turn that device off before you strap it to a child? So industry is very powerful and they've got their tentacles everywhere. So, folks, that's all the bad news, right? But once you know, you're halfway there. We're going to spend the next 15 or 20 minutes talking about what hope we have, what amazing inroads are being made, and what you can do personally to take control over your technology and to support initiatives that are going on right now to help advance our voices towards safe technology. So I was so inspired by Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. He said that when we actually make meaningful changes in our world, it comes through three areas. One, the public learns that there's been a disservice, and then they get engaged and get informed, and then we do something about it, which is what we hope we inspire by doing these monthly webinars with you. So you can learn a little bit, have the courage to make a little change, come back, learn a little bit more. So come back as many times as you want. We're here to help you. And then it gets taken through the courts. And eventually, public policy is usually the last thing to catch up. And we enact public policy to protect the public rather than corporate profits. So, what can we do? We can flip our router around and look at those wonderful Ethernet ports and then go get your Ethernet cables back. If you have to buy new ones, you might consider getting something that's called a shielded Ethernet cable. That just means that inside the plastic encasement, it has a foil liner, and then the wires are inside that. What that does is it reduces another form of man-made electromagnetic field, and that's dirty electricity that comes off of the magnetic and the electrical fields from the wires. So for some people, that becomes a health hazard as well. So why not protect yourself and just pay a couple extra bucks for a shielded cable? And then most of us have more than one device. So you can get something, the one I've got shown on that graphic is just this little thing. It's called an Ethernet switch. You know, it's not huge. You plug it into your electricity, and then you plug in your main Ethernet cable from your router. And, you know, it's like an extension box for electronics, for your phones, for your tablets. Just get another shorter Ethernet cable from wherever you're going to put your main hub here. And then get the individual adapters, because many devices don't have a direct Ethernet port anymore, but wherever it's got the charging station plug in there, you can plug in an adapter that will allow you to plug in an Ethernet cable. Pretty cool, huh? So you can go look and see, you know, what kind of cable you would need, and you can check on some of these links here. And again, at the end of my slides, we'll give you links to some trusted resources that we know. And so that's the first step, is you hardwire your stuff. As I mentioned earlier, in your settings, you can forward cell phone calls to a landline. So get your landlines back and protect yourself at home, and then you can turn off all the antennas. So you have to go into your settings and turn off the cellular and the data and the Bluetooth and the Wi-Fi and the locator and the hotspot and the 5G. Sometimes turning airplane mode on is sufficient, but you also need to look at what Bluetooth and Wi-Fi say. If they say on or not connected, you just need to tap that and turn it off. Because if it says not connected, it's still going, hello, here I am, I want to connect, hello, 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 and it's sending that radiation. So make sure everything is off. And then you have to measure, because these antennas can be sneaky. I had a couple of extra antennas in my printer that I didn't know about, and they didn't control the little faceplate glow light. So when I thought I had turned off the Wi-Fi and it was no longer glowing on my printer, I was sitting here one day and I'd eaten a clean organic breakfast. I had slept well, but it just felt like the earth was sucking me down again. And I've never felt good under fluorescent light. So maybe I'm fortunate. My body tells me when there's something in the environment that makes me feel not so great. So something had me feeling like the earth was sucking me down again. So I pulled out my meter and I turned it on. And sure enough, my printer's antennas were on, and my daughter had been home from college and needed to print something and said, Mom, can I turn on the Wi-Fi? I said, yeah, just make sure you turn it off. She said, and I need to use the printer. And I said, okay, just make sure you turn off the antenna. Well, we didn't know there were three antennas in there. All I had to do after I figured out what was radiating was go into the manual. I found it online, look up the wireless stuff, and then I just went into the settings on that printer and just turned them off. And then I measured again and made sure that I had radio silence. So, step one, wires to everything. Step two, turn off the antennas, and step three, measure to make sure you got it all. And for those who might have joined us late, we do have the ability to get these things put into our libraries. So ask your library to get a radio frequency detection meter for their Library of Things collection if you can't afford to buy it outright. Or pitch your pennies with your friends and neighbors and family, get one that you can pass around and share. Okay. So if you want a good night's sleep, turn off your Wi-Fi at night. Turn off the antennas on your cellular devices. Turn off the antennas on your wearables. Don't charge things near your bed. Charge while you're in the shower or something, but the charging cables throw off dirty man-made electromagnetic fields too. During the day, you want to get to everything hardwired with no antennas on, but during the transition, maybe you get these covers. They are fabric shields that have metal lining, and it creates a Faraday box around your routers with enough signal still getting through that you can still get a connection if you have to, but really make sure to protect your sleep at night. And then there are some routers that are low EMF. Um, so you can check this out when you get my slides if you want to look at that. And in our schools, here's what tech safe looks like. You just plug in devices. You can get, I showed you the little switch box. You can get one for the classroom. And your school administrators can go into the school systems and greatly reduce the power levels without even losing connectivity. So we have resources here with Tech Safe Schools to show us how to go in and do that for your IT team. You can reduce the power output all the way down to 10% without even losing signal as we begin to transition toward hardwired technology. Why not reduce what we have already if it's not going to lose any connection? And then you can turn off certain antennas because you have enough coverage from the 2.4 gigahertz antenna. You may not even need the 5 gigahertz antenna. So, and then you can also reduce the beacon signal. How many times a second does it pulsate to use the handshakes? These can be reduced down to a minimum. So lots of things we can do at no charge to really just start addressing this until we can get to hardwired technology. So that's what we can do with the things that are under our control. What can we do in the courts to stop this insanity of rolling out technology on top of everybody? So the Federal Communications Commission had an open docket questioning whether this technology was safe. There were 11,000 pages of evidence of scientific and medical and testimonial harm filed. They completely ignored it. And so the courts ordered the FCC to account for what this is doing to children, the environment, the elderly, people with electrical sensitivity. And it's now been over 4 years and the FCC has done nothing. So now the Environmental Health Trust, Children's Health Defense, and others who sued are coming back to the courts to say, look, they didn't do anything. We need to step up the heat here. But again, all this takes so many years to do. Here in Massachusetts, the State Association for Boards of Health has already put 4 pages in their legal guidelines on cell towers. And they are watching carefully a really important lawsuit here in Massachusetts where Verizon put a cell tower on top of a neighborhood that made 17 children and adults so sick that after investigating for the first time in the country, a board of health issued a notice to Verizon to come to the table and tell them why they should not issue a cease and desist order. They wanted them to come to the table. Let's come up with a solution. Another commercial property owner in the town of Pittsfield had already raised their hand and said, hey, we've got property here. It's nowhere near a neighborhood. You can just move that cell tower here. And Verizon didn't come to the table. They went to the courts and got an injunction against the Board of Health. And so now there is a lawsuit that has made its way up to the Supreme Judicial Court here in Massachusetts. There was their hearing in December, and we're waiting probably this spring to hope and pray that there are legal standings that the Board of Health has the policing power to enforce protection. The FCC guidelines say that you can't prohibit under certain conditions a cell tower going up, but it looks like in Massachusetts law that once something goes into the community, if it is making people or in the environment sick, it is the Board of Health's responsibility legal to mitigate that. So we're waiting for the 7 justices on the Supreme Judicial Court here in Massachusetts to rule on that. And that's with great thanks to Children's Health Defense, who was also part of that federal lawsuit. So lots of great things happening. Also in Massachusetts, for the first time, there was a little 10-year-old boy at a private school here called the Fay School who kept getting sick in school and winding up in the nurse's office. And bottom line, the parents, after a couple of years of taking him to the doctor and not knowing what was going on, recognized a pattern. When he was home on school vacation or on summer break, his symptoms rectified: the headaches, the nosebleeds, the nausea, the dizziness, the anxiety, the cognitive impairment, all went away when he was home. And within a day or two of getting back in that private school, all of his symptoms would come slamming back. And so the parents started investigating all of his symptoms and realized there could be something in the environment that was causing them. And they found an environmental health doctor who was able to diagnose him with electromagnetic radiation syndrome. And so the parents went to the school and said, look, can we please get accommodations for our son, who was by then, by the time they figured it out, going into 7th grade? Could we please ask that his classrooms be hardwired and that he not be exposed to radiation in school? Well, this is a very prestigious international boarding school, and they have a wait list a mile long and are more prone to disenrolling families that raise any kind of an issue. So they declined their request for accommodations. And under the Americans with Disabilities Act, it doesn't matter if it's a private school or a public. Every child has a reasonable right to ask for access to their education. So then the second time, they hooked the child up with a dosimeter, which is what doctors will use when they're administering treatments using radio frequency radiation to make sure they don't get overexposed. They hooked the child up with a dosimeter and also equipped him with a high-end radio frequency detection meter that also recorded the findings. So at the end of the day, the boy went through his school day, and when they looked at the 2 data sets, they went like this in tandem. Wherever there were high radio frequency emissions, his little heart was going jiggity. So they brought this data set back to the administrators at the Fay School and asked for accommodations. And once again, they were denied. Third time, the parents go back and say, look, we are blessed to have the means. Could we please just pay out of pocket to hardwire the 7 or whatever classrooms he was going to need to be in? Because as a 7th grader, he would need to be rotating classrooms. And once again, they denied him the accommodation request. So the family sued under the ADA. And although they didn't win the court case outright, for the first time in the United States, in their ruling, they recognized that, yeah, you don't have to have heat to have harm, because doctors and scientists testified and provided the evidence that at non-thermal, non-ionizing low levels, this man-made radio frequency radiation from the industrial strength Wi-Fi system and from all the devices in the school could be causing that child to become ill. So the first time in the courts, the United States recognized you don't have to have heat to have harm. So all these lawsuits build off of one another and set precedent. So these are just a few, but there are lawsuits happening all over the United States and all over the world, and you can do the deeper dive on that. So I mentioned early on that we helped New Hampshire pass the first law in the country to investigate wireless radiation. And back in the fall, when the president's executive order came out to address what's making our children so sick, in the Make America Healthy Again Commission strategy report, they called out electromagnetic radiation as one of the areas. And you may have seen in the news these last couple of weeks that Health and Human Services Secretary Robert F. Kennedy Jr. did an interview with USA Today that says, yes, we are now starting our investigation. They are appointing people to a panel that will investigate. So maybe there is a cavalry coming, but it's going to take years before we see meaningful action to protect our children. So with the New Hampshire Commission report, Rep. Abrami put in these great questions. Why do Lloyd's of London, Swiss Re, and others long since recognize that this is a world-leading risk and they don't offer coverage? So our towns can be left holding the bag on damages. Why does the legal fine print even exist to tell us to keep this away from the body? And we covered that at the beginning of our program today. Why is the FCC continuing to ignore thousands of peer-reviewed studies? And why do they only talk about heat when we know the science has many other biological effects at the non-thermal level? And why does the US allow hundreds of times more radiation than other countries like Russia and China and Italy and Belgium? And why is nobody looking at the cumulative effect with all these exposures coming from many directions? So we got this law passed in 7 months. We've had bills here in Massachusetts for 10 years. In 7 months, we got this through the New Hampshire House, the New Hampshire Senate, and under Governor Sununu's pen. And they made it a law that they would have to form a commission, spend a year and investigate. And even during the pandemic, they stuck to that deadline and came out with this groundbreaking commission report that documents all the conflicts of interest with our federal agencies and the industry. They were asked to come to the table. They never came. And they make 15 recommendations to protect our families and our environment, to label everything at eye level that's radiating, to get it out of our schools, to educate the public, to get our building inspectors trained to measure for this stuff. So this commission report is one of the best documents that we can share with our loved ones, with our towns, and it comes with high credibility for a state legislature to make recommendations. But every time we brought the recommendations forward in new bills to enact into law, the industry with their deep pockets came in and torpedoed it. So we have to do the work from the ground up. We have 6 bills filed here in Massachusetts. 2 of them are to give us the right to opt out of these utility smart meters that are causing so much harm. And we have one to protect the kids in schools. We have one to beef up our Civil Rights Act so those with illnesses can ask for reasonable accommodations. We also have another one to get these electromagnetic illnesses integrated into our state level MAVEN database so we can track the number of people being reported as sick. So you're welcome to go out and see the bills, and I will send information to you when we create a simple action item that you can take to lend your voice to these. So just know there are wonderful resources at every level. Know your audience, talk to your doctors about this, talk to your dentist, talk to your therapist, talk to your alternative healers. Anybody can go get trained. Dr. Cindy Russell is a plastic surgeon out in California. She and Dr. Joel Moskowitz at UC Berkeley in their public health area. They develop positions for safe technology, so you can direct your medical teams to this highly credible resource. And then for other professionals, there's a wonderful paper that will help them learn what the backbone of this issue is. So lots of great resources and lots of excellent resources for our schools. The New York Times did a wonderful expose showing what Silicon Valley execs are doing. They're sending their kids to school with no technology, and they're having nannies sign contracts that there will be no technology around their children. So look at all these really encouraging inroads that are happening around the country and around the world. And use what you want. Let us know if we can help. So look at Tech Safe Schools, share this with your schools, because I think the schools know something is wrong, but they've never been empowered with the resources. The Massachusetts Breast Cancer Coalition has already developed K through 12 curriculum on prevention with cell towers and wireless devices. We've done professional development. We've got all that built. And then here's this online training course that can be used with older children, with the whole school system, with our towns, with our work. So it's off the shelf in an hour on your lunch hour. We could level set with the facts, and it kicks out a tip sheet at the end with handy reminders. And it also allows you to print out a certificate of completion to give to your human resources department. So next steps, let's keep learning. I will do these webinars every month. There's excellent films. The Social Dilemma talks about how social media got hijacked and how it's now really being used for nefarious purposes. We have this award-winning film, Generation Zapped. It's available through our library streaming services and all the other major streaming services. And I was honored to have this little bit of work that I did with my schools with, best practices for mobile devices is featured in there. And then I came up with an EMF points of confusion versus fact sheet here. Some people say they love to print that out and carry it with them. When you're talking to somebody about this, it's a nice handout to just quick bullet points on what all the disinformation has been given to us and what the actual truth of it is with credible resources. So take care of what you can take care of that you have control over. And then if you can please lend your voice when others are working tirelessly behind the scenes to create these action alerts where we can collectively use our voice to push the needle to safe technology. There's an initiative called 704 No More that's working at the federal level to try and block some really bad bills and to stop the FCC from steamrolling and taking away the rights that our towns do have to protect us. So click on that. You can do that today. If you want to help support these opt-out bills for Massachusetts so you don't have to wind up with a toxic gas, water, electric, propane or whatever solar meter on your home, take that opt-out action alert item too, please. All right, so look through here. There's some really wonderful ideas for creating a tech Sabbath is maybe a good first step where together you guys just check out for a day and go do something else, but plan for it. And here's some good ideas. For today, let's aim for as low as reasonably achievable. Start by reducing what you can. Notice what your habits are, identify what's radiating where, and don't beat yourself up. We didn't know about this. Let's not freak each other out by, the newly baptized and scare everybody. Let's be calm, let's be fact-based, and let's just learn what we can do. Start by protecting your sleep. Our friends at the Building Biology Institute have a really nice fact sheet you can use for that. Then one by one, start replacing wireless connections with Ethernet cables and adapters. On your devices, make sure airplane mode is on and turn off the Wi-Fi and the Bluetooth and then measure. So here are other resources we talked about. My colleague, Dr. Carrie Crofton up in Canada, has a wonderful book called Less Screen, More Green with some tech safety toolkits in there. The Environmental Health Trust has all sorts of little flyers and postcards that you can use. There's information on the phone-free school movement, the Screen Strong. Parents can join them to create a wave of parents who are not going to sit still while our children get harmed. Here's the Building Biology Institute, and then lessemf.com has some of the accoutrements. You can check in with them. Safe Living Technologies has the meter and some shielding. And they all have really good tech support. So check in and ask your questions with the pros. You can reach us here. And as I said, we will have our webinars every month. Take the Safer Screen Time course. It's less than the cost of a movie ticket, which just helps with our overhead, but it can bring you and your family members up to speed very quickly. And now we will stop for a few minutes and I will ask Ellen to unmute and let me know if there are any questions in the chat.
Yes, I have one from, actually a few questions from, I'm not sure the pronunciation, Yaren Rachmani.
Okay.
She, I guess, it's a woman, I'm not sure.
Mhm.
How to opt out of smart meters. And they have a net meter, doesn't know what that is. I don't know what that is. And the best way to protect if you cannot get rid of a smart meter and where to purchase a safe and sound meter.
Okay, so we've answered the where to purchase a safe and sound meter, that's Safe Living Technologies. There are some shielding options from a smart meter. It'll be great once you have your radio frequency meter in hand because then you have the actual data of how much you're being radiated. And in Massachusetts, if you have National Grid or Eversource, if you go to my resources page and click on the smart meter stuff, you'll be able to find the opt-out links there. And when you get my slides, you'll be able to kind of drill down through there as well. You want to shield very carefully. I suggest you contact a building biologist to do that. We have a wonderful gentleman here in Massachusetts whose sweetheart was very badly injured by a smart meter. His name is Ken Gartner, and he graduated from MIT many years ago with an engineering degree and went into semi-retirement. And when he and his sweetheart built their home and that smart meter went on, that tipped her off into becoming very electrically sensitive. So he went and got certified by the Building Biology Institute to know what to do at home, but also to help others. So Ken Gartner is available at BioSafer Housing. And if you want to shoot me an email, I can give you his contact information. He will also be my co-host next month for our free public education webinar, and he will give many more responses to the smart meter issue. So I hope that helps. Other questions?
Yeah, I think this same person, I'm trying to think, wanted to know, maybe you have posted my articles from the recorder and
Yes, if you go
wanted
to
to,
Massachusetts for Safe Technology and go to the news page, you will find Ellen's articles there as well as those from a couple other gentlemen in her community.
um, okay, that was pretty much it.
Okay.
No, that's not it.
Um,
I'm sorry. I put something in the chat. I'd like to ask a question verbally.
yeah,
I
go
see
ahead.
that.
We just wanted to get through the chat before we sign off.
Yeah, no, that was in the chat that I wanted. Okay, great. Thank you. Yeah, I am not a tech person. Think of me as sort of like a, anyway, I'm wanting to go over, please. I came to this because I want to understand what in God's name is Ethernet. Are there any harms to Ethernet? And I want to just go more slowly over how I go about getting the Wi-Fi off and this Ethernet switch. And I'm a neophyte to this. This is so
Yeah,
I
and that's
first
okay, honey. That's where we all started,
I
right?
know, but I came time to learn about that. So that's
Yeah.
what I wanted to get out
So
of it.
when you get my slides tomorrow, you're going to
I
have that little diagram.
no, I'd rather talk verbally. I want a human to explain to me little bit more slowly about what gets plugged into what.
Yeah.
I
And I did explain that in tonight's
It went too
presentation.
fast. No, you said it wasn't like introductory to someone who is this is odd to them, severely odd to them. I just would appreciate a slower conversation now or another time. But I
Okay,
want
well,
to
let's set
really
it up for another time. I can definitely help you with that.
okay, thank you.
But when you get my slides and when you get my video, you can replay that as many times as you need.
It doesn't go into enough depth.
Um,
It was no,
I-
it doesn't tell
I'm
me
in the
what
same
God's name
boat.
is Ethernet. Is it even safe? How does it work? I thought we were going to go into, well, here's the alternative and here's why it's a good alternative. And all I know is it's the same bizarre word. And I don't understand enough about
Yeah.
what gets
So in a
damaged.
nutshell, what it does is it takes the signal that comes into your house from a big fat cable. That's connected to your router or your modem there, right? So that's how you're getting the Ethernet or the internet to your home. All you got to do is plug in an Ethernet cable that will pick up that signal and carry it to your device.
And then multiple devices. You said stuff tonight that I really want to learn about, like the
Yeah.
the thing that had many plugs in it. It's like I
Yeah.
see it, but I
That's
don't
an
know how to do
Ethernet
it.
switch. And I know it's all new, but in my slides, I provide a link so that it will go right to the internet where you can look at those and purchase one.
Well, I know, but then I need the tech person to say, okay,
Yeah. And you
this
can hire a consultant to come in and do this with you.
I can't hire a consultant for every single thing. I want human to human, some regular basic human kindness
Yeah.
on how to do this, how to have kindness towards a baby boomer who didn't grow up with any of this.
Yeah. And that's fine.
And,
We can do that. We can do it, Yahara. Don't
great.
worry.
Okay,
yeah,
thanks.
I'm in the same boat. I
uh,
really want to do it, but I'm going to need help.
Yeah. And that's fine. And you know
yeah,
what?
maybe
I,
I could offer a few suggestions.
sure.
It's depending where your router is, you would need to purchase a Ethernet cable. You know, if it's in another room or something, you know, it might have to be 50 feet long and snake it along the walls
Yeah.
or ceiling or
How to do
something.
multiple
But to
computers,
get it
you know,
plugged
without
in,
Wi-Fi.
there are plugs in the back of the um, router that you can plug in. You plug in this cable and then you string it to your computer or whatever. And there's more than one plug, so I think you can plug in, you know, more than one cable if you have more than one device. The other thing is that when you're sleeping, I mean, what I do is if I'm not on the internet, any time of day, if I'm not on the internet, that router is unplugged. And I noticed I slept better once I started doing that. So you might want to, you know, just experiment sometimes with unplugging things, and also make sure on your device, if you look at your computer, there's a place where it has the Wi-Fi signal, and you want to, there's a button in the back of the router. If you have an older router, you can press this button and it will turn your Wi-Fi off. Okay. So I'm trying to help you, but
Yeah, I turn my Wi-Fi off every night.
well, that's great.
But
That's
I
great.
share a house with a husband who doesn't have any of these same concerns.
Yeah, that's a really hard one, but hang in there. You know, I was in a household full of people too, and I was the mom who figured this all out. You know, they give you a hard time, but eventually they did come around, and having a meter in hand and show the legal fine print in the phone that says, hey, they warned us, and then measure it. And that is what I find gets people's attention the quickest.
I got to find a way to borrow one.
Yeah.
You
Yeah.
know,
Carol, where are you?
I'm in Northern Virginia.
Okay. There's an organization called Virginians for Safe Technology.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. Reach out to them.
Okay.
And you may luck out and have somebody right near you who'd be happy to come over with a meter and look.
Oh, that's great.
Or ask your library to get one or purchase one yourself with yourself or friends and loved ones.
I don't think I know enough people that give a hoot, but I do.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Um,
It's got to start somewhere. None of us, you know, I was 2 years all by myself before I found somebody I could actually talk to about this. So I started where you guys are. I'm not technologically savvy, but I'm smart and I can teach myself, right?
Yeah, and then next month you're going to talk about smart meters
Yeah.
because I definitely have questions there.
Yeah, we'll go into much more depth. And in
Yeah.
fact, if you go to my news
I mean,
page,
I had them say I signed out of I don't want a smart meter. I signed out.
good.
So, but they seem to still be reading it at length. So I think I'm being scammed. Like, oh, let's just charge her whatever the heck we want.
Yeah, once you have your RF meter, you'll be able to measure and know better whether they gave you an actual device that doesn't transmit.
Or if they're just scamming me and saying, I'm just going to
Yeah.
charge you twice as much this year.
Yeah, but you've got some good people in Virginia. I'll be happy to see you connect up with them.
So those are the people. Okay,
Yeah.
cool. Thank you.
Okay, you're welcome. Okay, any other questions?
I don't see any others.
Okay.
Let's see.
Right.
Is there an organization in Texas?
Um, I believe so. If you go out to Americans for Responsible Technology, they have a toolkit and they have collected a coalition of people all over the country who have set up, kind of like I've got Massachusetts for Safe Technology. Some other areas have also set up people who are getting together on this. So go to Americans for Responsible Technology, click on their toolkit, and one of the options is going to be join a group, and you may find somebody in your area, or you may want to start a group, and they've got a little toolkit for doing that too. Okay. All right, everybody. Well, thank you so much for coming along to learning with us. We know it's like drinking water out of a fire hose when we first learn about this, but there's no cavalry coming. So we've got to figure it out for ourselves, connect with others who are wanting to do right by technology in our lives. And don't go it alone. Come back every month and learn more and ask your questions if you want. We will give you our contact information again with our slides and the recording tomorrow. So feel free to reach out with questions. And Ellen, I want to thank you for being our wonderful co-host tonight,
Yeah.
for having the courage to learn a new skill on how to co-host on Zoom.
It was a pleasure. I enjoyed it. Thank you.
All right.
Thank you.
Well,
And I have another suggestion which we can talk later about someone who you might like to have as a guest.
okay. I would love that.
Who's an expert in his own right.
All right, everybody. Have a tech safe day, and we hope to see you again soon. Take care, everybody. Bye-bye.
Thank you.